Well, hello everybody. I guess we are live. Let's check all these platforms. Yes, we indeed are live. Sound check. Well, oh, bit of static. Okay, now it sounds much better. So, in today's episode, we will be talking about a very interesting topic and very important topic. And that topic is the free speech and regulation of free speech. And I will be having as a guest a person I met on the internet, not surprisingly, Trevor. We are in a Discord voice chat and we had a conversation with different people holding various opinions. And yeah, in the end, I thought that this person has some very interesting insight about if we should regulate, how we should regulate, why, and all these aspects. And I believe, yeah, we are going to have an interesting discussion on this topic. So without further comments, let's bring in Trevor.
Hello.
Okay, hello, Trevor. Thank you for accepting my invitation.
Certainly.
Okay, so let's talk about free speech. But in order for that to start the conversation, tell us a bit about yourself. Like, who are you? Where are you from? And why is this free speech thing important for you?
So I live in Utah, which is in the United States. And I would say that free speech, honestly, if I'm being honest, my obsession with free speech comes from the fact that I grew up in a high demand religion where you really didn't get to question certain things, and obedience is a highly treasured virtue. And so to the extent that I obsess about free speech is I guess it's an anti-authority streak in me, because um, I think people ought to be able to express themselves and also to challenge authority, and also even challenge societal norms and politeness, and not be censured or censored or punished by authority figures for doing so.
Oh, okay, that's very interesting. Because hey, wait a moment, isn't free speech in free because you are in America and everything in America is free and stuff like that? Come on.
Well, yes, I mean, of course, we have the First Amendment and all that stuff, and so in that respect, yes, very much have free speech, and I'm not debating that. But like, certainly, as far as my motivation goes, like, I have a problem with any kind of authority, whether it's the government or a corporation or any other type of institution trying to silence people. And so it's not even just a matter of whether or not the government does something. I think the concern can extend beyond the scope of the government.
Okay, and I was what I was trying to get with that question, and you answered properly to it, is that people have a, let's put it nicely, naive understanding of free speech, like something that exists, but that something isn't always connected with what is happening in real life. And like you said, hey, yes, there is free speech in the USA, but in my personal life, I need this free speech to be something useful, to be something practical. and I need to have that right, because otherwise it's just there in the abstract, and it
Right.
deprives me of a lot of things. And yeah, these people usually forget very easily.
Yes. No, that's exactly right. It does me no good to have this theoretical right to free speech, or even to say that, oh, well, the government isn't censoring you when my ability to speak has been deprived from me by other
Yeah,
forces. Like, it doesn't matter whether or not I have this theoretical legal right to free speech uh, if I have no functional way to speak in society, to interact with the people around me, and to express what I would like to express.
yeah, exactly. And I come, for example, I'm from an Eastern European country, former communist country, and lots of communist socialists that I encounter online, they always like to point out that Nazi Germany, fascist Germany, whatever you like to call it, under Hitler,
Mm-hmm.
and then after the Second World War, the United States had pretty harsh policies on silencing political speech and silencing the opponents, fringe currents, more or less powerful, and they
Mm-hmm.
really went hard after those people and their supporters. And I always come up and say, hey, but the communists did the same thing.
Oh
Just
yeah,
because you like the leftist
of
ideology
course,
doesn't
yeah,
mean the Soviet Union exactly didn't engage in the same thing. And people are like, wait, but you could talk. And here is another thing about like the nuance of free speech. For example, not necessarily in the first decades after Second World War, when everything was pretty harsh, but after that it was a form of softening, a warming of every regulation and their manifestation in practice. And you could
yeah,
criticize the government, the party, various local leaders and stuff like that. But if you're Joe Nobody, or I should say Ivan
yeah,
Nobody, nobody would come after you. At worst, they would call you to the human resources and they would have a conversation with you and then talk again with the local party apparatski and then maybe an visit from the police and stuff. And there was a scale of escalation things. And if you really tried to organize and stuff, then you would encounter
right,
harsh repression and all sorts of evil, like literally evil, horrific stuff. Okay, and that kind of still happened after and that was maybe more baffling after the
yeah,
revolution, after the communism officially fell, and we are very free and democratic. You could talk, but your speech was meaningless because you wouldn't have access to the platforms, to the newspapers, to the media, to television, so, or
yeah.
radio. So
You were shouting to the wind.
yeah, exactly. You had that free speech, but you really wasn't able to use it in a meaningful way.
Yeah, and so and that kind of brings us to the place that we're at today, because like, sure, we can talk about like the Soviet Union and the United States when they've tried to go after people for expressing views, but like what we're dealing with today isn't quite the same as that, because it's not the government that is censoring people, but rather, at least not directly, um, but rather it is corporations, um, and we can, and especially social media platforms that are engaging in this kind of censorship. And so, um, and people will often say, well, they're private companies, and so that's their right. Like, you don't have to use Facebook, you don't have to use YouTube, you don't have to use these, this particular, Twitter. You don't have to use this particular site in order to say something. You can go to an alternative site. However, this is where we get into the territory of public utilities. So, like in the United States, we have this concept, and again, this the biggest example to give for this is public utilities. But we have this concept called state actor, where essentially, when a corporation starts providing a service, and eventually that service becomes so integral to the way society functions. So, for example, electricity. Like, there was a time when electricity was a luxury, right? You didn't have to have electricity in order to function in society. Well, that's not the case anymore. And so, um, the service that they offer is so integral to the way that society functions that you cannot reasonably be expected to go without it and function well within society. And what's more is they also tend, well, I mean, we'll get into this part later, but they're also functional monopolies. And so because they fulfill that kind of a role, um, they basically start essentially providing a basic service that and acting in a capacity that a government would. So again, state actor. And so what we do is we declare them to be a state actor, and so they have to provide that service under the restrictions of the Constitution. So in other words, they can't deny you service because you're of a different race, or because you're of a different gender, or because of your religion, or like anything like that. And so you have rights, your constitutional rights, that would apply if you were getting this service from the government, now apply to getting this service from a private corporation. And
Yeah,
to that extent, I would argue that some social media platforms, especially the ones that have reached a certain aggregate size in society, kind of are acting in that capacity, and they should be declared state actors. And well, people are like, well, what is this fundamental service that they're providing? And I would argue that the most important one is that they are offering, they own the public forum now.
yeah,
And so, yeah,
exactly.
they own
And
the
this
public
is
forum.
yep,
Sorry, continue.
and this is another aspect that I want to put in, and tell me, please, uh, your understanding from the other side of the pond. When I say free speech, I'm thinking of something that you said, and of course the other things that we'll be discussing, but also something that is, if not free, because I open my mouth right now and words come out of it, and that is free. But also, if I want to pass a message, and I don't know, write my message on a piece of cardboard or a wooden board and put it in in the front of my yard, then that is almost cost free. Everything I want to do associated with promoting my message comes to almost a zero cost, has almost a zero cost associated with it. But it's not anymore the case with these social media platforms, where most of the discourse have migrated towards. Because
Right,
literally, if I don't have a voice, a free place where I can say what I want to say, and of course, I'm not saying go kill X, because that's of course illegal. But I want
right,
to say, hey, this is my political idea. This is what I want to achieve and implement. I cannot do it, and therefore the implication is that I should build my own platform. But my building my own platform, in the version 1.0 of the free speech, is me printing
yes,
some leaflets or painting on a piece of cloth, which is almost zero cost, compared to building the next Facebook or other websites, which ranges from at least thousands of dollars to tens, hundreds, and so on.
yeah. Yeah, you hit on several areas there. So like, again, like, the public forum isn't somebody standing on a box in the park anymore. The public forum isn't distributing leaflets on the street. Not that people don't still do those things from time to time, but by and large, the public forum, the place where we have discourse, where we talk about things and debate things, and exchange ideas in society. That happens. Um, that happens on the internet now. That happens specifically on social media platforms, and so it's it. But the difference is that whereas the park or the street corner, whereas that's publicly owned, that's a public space. What we're dealing with on the internet is these are private spaces. These are privately owned spaces. And yet the role that they fill is the public forum. So in other words, they're providing a government service in a sense. And so that's part of why I think they should be declared state actors. And the other thing that you bring up that's very pertinent is the cost involved, because again it's the idea of that if somebody is cut off from these services, that you're putting an undue burden on their ability to interact with society. So in the case of social media platforms, if you are banned from them because you express an unpopular or controversial opinion, it's effectively silencing you, because you are no longer able to access the space where public discourse is had. And so it effectively silences you. And yeah, sure, you can go set up your own platform or whatever, but the fact is that that's not where the aggregate of society is. And so, which brings us back to why, again, so somebody during the discussion we had on Discord, they were like, "What? So you want to make all social media sites state actors?" I'm like, "No," because because again, to go back to the example of utilities, there's a certain aggregate of society that gravitates towards using certain platforms, right? Most of the world uses YouTube. Most of the world uses Face. Like, like our those they have an aggregate use in society where where there's kind of like a mass of people who are able to influence and public discourse in that regard. And so due to the kind of gravity, the massive gravity that some of these platforms hold, like Twitter, like YouTube, like Facebook, they have again that is where the public discourse happens. It's not on these secondary minor sites. And so if you cut people off from these major platforms, you're essentially silencing them in a way. And
Yeah,
so
no,
again, because
in all the ways, not just in a way, you are literally silencing them.
well, you're basically robbing them of the ability to participate in public discourse.
And to get on that, before, even if we used this free speech for, at least let's say in the United States, in the America, the expression of free speech existed there since, let's say, the beginning. It was still a concept, because ultimately in the 50s or early 1900s, if you wanted to say, hey, I will be a politician, or I will be an activist, and I will fight for this, I will promote this or that idea, you still needed to associate with people and sort of get the permission from the actors, from the governmental actors, or of course private actors, but you would need to interact with the existing system. And of course, back then, the idea that you could start, like you say, your own utility company by yourself, or your own radio or something like that, was mostly outside of the average individual range of possibilities and abilities. So maybe we should sort of review this understanding of the free speech and incorporate this. Hey, yes, it is free, but if we don't properly account for the cost, and the cost of infrastructure and distributing your message, then it's no longer free, and we are just deluding yourself. But I like it how you put it. The private corporations are now acting as government, and they are perfectly
Yes.
cosplaying and trying to hide and blend and say, well, but we are private while doing the government's work, and that's very deceiving
Right.
from my perspective.
And there is certainly evidence of governments again, more than enough evidence to show that our governments interact with these corporations to basically tell them, hey, you need to change your algorithms to suppress these certain views and to elevate these other views. And like that just, we know that happens. And even like, you don't even need to look any further than how they interact with China to know that. But we also know that United States government agencies do the same thing, and that European agencies do the same thing. So it's not really far-fetched to say that these social media platforms are acting in a government capacity. And again, if I was wanting to get around First Amendment protections in the United States, so that we could have censorship without the government having to do it, well, all you have to do is privatize the public forum, right? Just privatize it, and now have the few corporations that own it, uh, have them censor, and oh look, there we go. The government's not doing it though, but you know,
Yeah,
basically
yeah, it's
the effect is
external.
still the same. In other words, rights don't mean anything in theory. They have to mean something in practice as well.
Hmm. Yeah, and by the way, how do you recover this sense of, hey, it's my right, get the beep away and give me my right? How do you get this, I don't know, visceral thing of getting your rights back and owning your right to free speech, like with a practical manifestation? Not just I have the right to free speech, meaningless, naive, in the ether stuff. How do you get back to that?
I think it's when you start when you start to make actual proposals, because again, like I propose that we make some of these, again, we'd have to haggle over the details. Like I'm not a legislator. I don't know the ins and outs of what the legislation should be. I just know that at some point, at a certain size, at a certain share of the market, shall we say, that a social media platform gets to, I don't think it's unreasonable to say that it should be subject to constitutional restrictions. Now, again, this will be a different process in different countries. Europe doesn't have the same constitution that we do, and they don't have the same laws that we do, and different countries in Europe don't have the same laws as each other. So it's like the process will be different in every country, and the laws that they come up with will be tailored to their situations in their own countries. But with regards to United States, again, it would be putting out there the idea that maybe we should declare these guys state actors, and as providing a public service, which is the public forum, and that we recognize that, and that we put them under First Amendment restrictions the same way we would any other public utility. And then explaining what that means, and then explaining why to do that, and not just like being like my free speech, because when you start with that point, again, people aren't really going to listen out first, because it's like, well, the government's not doing anything, it's a private corporation, private business and all that stuff. And they do have a point, because normally, under most circumstances, we do let corporations and private businesses kind of conduct themselves in the way that they want to, freedom of association, all that sort of thing. The difference is, and so you have to be able to explain to people the difference between having some random podunk social media platform versus uh, a social media platform that has grown so large that it has this kind of sway in society, this aggregate sway, and that even institutions such as the government, such as other corporations or schools or state governments, local, like they also use these platforms actively to communicate with people. Like these are integral in the communication process from government institutions and corporate institutions and the people and the public. So, you know,
Oh,
but and so like you have to be able to explain the dynamic to people in order to help it make sense. Because just starting out with like, oh, free speech, it's like people don't necessarily see the threat or don't have all the dots connected to have that make sense.
Okay. On the topic of threat, are you approaching this topic of free speech, or at this stage, are you of the opinion or in the on the side of, hey, somewhere in the future this problem will become too great and we will have like serious problems with our democracy and how the free speech is working, the so-called free speech is
Yeah.
being heavily influenced, or you are of the more of the opinion that we passed that mark way ago,
Yeah.
couple
Yeah.
of
No.
years or so?
Yeah. No. We're already there, and we probably were there. We've probably been there for a number of years, and I don't even think it was. I don't even think it was 2016. Like I don't even think it was like Trump. I think we were there before, well before Trump entered the scene. I think we were somewhere there. I think we actually got there pretty quickly, like 2010, 2012. I think we were already getting into that territory. We just didn't realize it at the time.
Oh, yeah,
Because
I agree. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, and so yeah, we just didn't realize we were getting into that territory at the time, and now I think it's quite obvious that we are in that territory now.
Yeah, are you familiar with Cambridge Analytica, the UK firm?
Uh, I remember what it is, and I vaguely remember the controversy around it. It's basically selling our information and how that affected election and campaign planning,
Yeah, so largely what the people from Cambridge Analytica did
and that was during the
was,
Obama administration. That was
oh
before
yeah, yeah,
Trump.
yes, that was one, but also that the same firm was helping the Trump campaign. Anyway, what they did was they took a huge amount of data, official data from Facebook, with Facebook official permission. And of course, I'm more than sure that they bought from the gray, not necessarily dark market, but from the gray, because there is a lot of gray area. They bought lots of other databases with data from
Yes,
users,
right.
geolocations, and the other items. They put it together and they draw specific groups of behavior. And I believe that that wasn't something, I don't know, like artificial intelligence, or this something greatly than heart surgery or something like that. It wasn't extremely advanced, but it needed a certain level of sophistication in order to be done properly. But that sophistication, like you said, only points out that this thing was going on way before that level, before that perfectionable tool was available, the Cambridge Analytica.
Yeah, and so one of the arguments against the idea of making them state actors, for example, is that well, why don't we just break them up, right? Why don't we just break these corporations up, do a little trust busting? And this is where I get back into the this is where the monopoly side comes in. And I'm not talking about a monopoly as in like, oh, Facebook is the only social media platform, Twitter is the only social media platform. Like they're not, but they do have a functional monopoly in our society, in that again, because of the aggregate size and share of people and interactions that they possess. And you know, again, to tie it back to the public utilities argument, you know, with power companies, you know, we're not going to have every power company in the world build a separate line to every house in the world. Like that's just unrealistic. That's unreasonable, and you know, the whole world would turn to power lines at that point. Uh, so there's utility in having the monopoly, But that monopoly, again, because it is a monopoly and because it does provide such a basic service, again, it's functioning in the capacity of a government, because normally the only monopoly that's allowed to exist in society is the government. And
Yeah.
and so
We
that's
understood
that.
that it needs to be regulated.
Right. And so it needs to be regulated, and it needs to be subject to the same provisions, the same restraints for people's rights as a government would, because it's acting in
Mm.
that capacity. However, not just because it's acting in a government capacity, but also because there's actually a good benefit to society for that relative monopoly, because
Okay.
there's utility and a benefit to that would be lost if you break it up. So say you broke up Facebook, right? Again, Meta, whatever it's called now. Uh, Say you break it up. Well, okay, so now they've got several different platforms now. It's like, okay, now people have to try to cross-reference several new platforms, and they can't be the exact same, and that hinders commerce, that hinders communication, that hinders the level of interconnectivity that the monopoly of Facebook had earlier provided, which was actually good. It's not a bad thing. Like, those, there are good aspects of that. And we don't necessarily want to lose those aspects. We just need them to operate in a way that allows people to access it and have meaningful interaction with society through it, and not be cut off from that because of
Yeah,
arbitrary
political
reasons.
views. Yeah, exactly. But see, let me push back on that a little bit with an example which of Google Alphabet, which isn't specifically a social media company mainly, but they hold a huge hold over the internet. Like they command a good chunk, like an extremely big chunk of the internet, and that is a thing that I would push to be broken and heavily regulated. Also, even though we could do it, the fact what I believe is more problematic, the underlying problem would be to regulate, to properly regulate the how one entity, private or corporation, can acquire user data. Because we can break Facebook, we can break any company, but if me, a third party, like if me, Cambridge Analytica, buys data from Facebook 1, Facebook 2, Facebook 3, 4, 5, and 10, the result would be the same, and I create another monster. So how do we get into this don't share data or share data, and do we combat it just with regulation, or maybe transparency would be a better type of
Well, you know what? I actually think that there might, and again, the corporations would hate this, but I do think that there might be some in declaring, because again, I would actually have Google declared a state actor as well, because of its relative monopoly. And again, I don't think that that Google's monopoly is necessarily a bad thing. However, in declaring it a state actor in the United States, one of the provisions of our Constitution is that there is no unwarranted search or seizure. That basically we are, you know, we have a right to we have some form of a right to privacy. And if you declare a corporation a state actor, I would assume, and again, I could be wrong, I don't know the ins and outs of the jurisprudence on this aspect, but I would assume that the Fourth Amendment, which protects that right to privacy, I would assume that that would apply to those corporations as well. And so, in other words, they wouldn't necessarily be able to just collect our data willy-nilly.
well, thank God, so to say, we have that in Europe. And right now, the European Union is heavily trying to influence all the countries to implement the GDRP. It's about the Privacy Act, in shortened expression, and they are heavily regulating what type of data the companies are allowed to get from you, and you have to literally give your specific agreement to check the box.
Hmm.
Then they are subjected to specific regulation, pretty interesting, in order to how they store your personal private data, to whom they are allowed to sell it, and of course at a certain point you are allowed to notify all these entities that you want to withdraw your consent. And I believe that's a great step forward in this. It is not perfect, but it's a step
Right.
forward and an improvement.
Yeah, there are things that I could think of already just to improve that. However, I have heard about that, and I would like to see similar legislation in the United States.
Yeah, and this is another thing. Of course, USA has a pretty different legislation, and of course, the Constitution dictates or influences the how you look upon that legislation. But from the practice, we can definitely look from both sides of the pond and say, hey, this is the side which protects better the individual. We wouldn't do it 100% in the same way, but principles and ideas do definitely, and
Right.
especially the technical aspects, we can copy and implement and tell Facebook, hey, you know what you did in Europe? Yeah, implement that in USA and shut up.
Yeah, no, there are a number of things that I actually think European lawmakers get slightly better than American lawmakers. Um, it does sometimes seem that even the EU and constituent nations, like it does sometimes seem like you guys make a little bit better of a show on some individual liberty issues than the United States does.
Yeah, and I do remember there were some cases against Facebook and the penalties, especially I believe they were specifically when implementing this type of privacy things, and they got penalized or something like that, or heavily reprimanded. And I say like, wow, you is really doing something, because otherwise they are just talk and no no bite.
Yes. Um, but yeah, no, it's a new area. Like this is new territory still. Like sure, the internet's been around for what 20 years, 30 years, however long it's been around now. But a lot of this is still new territory, and so like I have no doubt that there would be concerns and legitimate complaints against what I've proposed because like this is a half baked idea of mine. Like as well thought out as some parts may seem, I don't know the total ins and outs, and but I do think it is time for us to have that conversation as a society.
Yeah, and see, one step from where we could start that is by stop trying to have only debates and only for the sake of gotchas. I gotcha, ha ha
Yeah.
ha ha. Okay, and another is um, here's an interesting, not necessarily comparison, but association at least. We are talking about free speech and not private, sorry, public utilities. And in the older days, we would have companies laying down power lines, electric cables, electric infrastructure, and so on. And after a specific amount of years or decades, the government said, yes, let's declare them public utilities because they belong to everybody and they should be equally
Mhm.
accessible and all the other considerants. But right now we are talking about free speech, and with this free speech is not just the simple association of, hey, you cannot, like you said earlier, literally build your own electric infrastructure, build your own dam or stuff like that. Nobody
Yeah.
can do that, all 250 million citizens or something. Uh, but here is, you don't build your own private electric power dam, wind turbine or something. but you have your personal data and your personal history, and that traditionally isn't
Right.
associated with free speech. So, how would you go about that? Like, would you, what would you implement form of transparency? 'Cause that would be my easy answer. Okay, let's make things transparent to a greater degree. What these companies are doing with my data, who are they censoring, and how are they censoring? Do you think that would help? Or
Well, I think it would help. I certainly wouldn't oppose that. I don't know how much it would affect anything, if only for the reason that again, if you are trying to interact with society and interact with the world through these platforms, and your option is to let us do this to you, or else fuck off, like you know, um, that then that becomes kind of a bit of a bind for people, because it's like, well, I need to be able to access this in order to do the thing that I want to do. I do think transparency would be good. I do think that we would also want to increase the options or the protections that people have along with that as well, not just the transparency side.
oh, absolutely. Well, I'm talking about transparency as a step forward in
Yeah,
fleshing out all the details. Facebook, what Facebook is
it
doing
would.
behind,
I
because otherwise we don't know. Because let me give you
gotcha.
to let
I
an
understand.
example. If we ask Facebook, hey, what is your list of bannable keywords? Please tell us how many times you ban this specific keyword or this phrase. Because if you say, "Hey, this religion is shit," okay, and okay, yeah, sure, ban it. I don't have a problem, but please tell me how many times you ban it in a day, and then give me data, not personal data, but let's say, hey, in Austin or in Texas there were 500 incidents. In Europe, there are 5 million incidents and stuff like that. That would be a first layer of data. And then if you say something, did Facebook implemented a form of, I don't know, what is that, restriction of your reach, or the Twitter, did they restrict your reach to how many people your message got? And how many
Yeah,
times did they did it in a specific times? Okay, and I believe this kind of data, it wouldn't be the best data, but would be a starting point to have
right,
specifics on what should we build after that.
right. In other words, at least people can see what's going on, and then that will give them the information they need to come up with better ideas of, like, well, how do we move forward with this? How do we change things if we want to change things? Um,
Yeah,
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 no,
exactly.
I
Because
can see that.
if we yeah, if we are having election days, or election weeks or something, and there isn't any, I don't know, infringement on certain topics, but then suddenly they are heavily downsized in reach, then we can easily say, hey, hey, that's not okay. You are being bad. You should be punished or something like that. Or also, what sort of punishment would you associate with this kind of stuff?
I would imagine it would largely be financial, would be
In a
my guess.
meaningful way, or a more symbolical?
Well, I mean, uh, are you asking what I would want or what I think we could realistically get? Um, if I got what I wanted, it would be meaningful. It would hurt. It would hurt the corporation. It would, or more specifically, it would hurt the people that own the corporation, as opposed to their employees or the business itself. Um, what I think we could realistically get, well, we'd probably only get a symbolic slap on the wrists, but I'd sooner take that over nothing at all.
Yeah, no, I agree. We need to put this, and transparency would at least give us, like layman, the terminology and the mechanics of it, and we could have a better, more informed discourse with our representatives to know what to tell them to ask. Not, Senator, are you aware this is a smartphone? No, I haven't seen one in my life. Type of Congress
Yeah.
conversation.
Oh, jeez. Oh, the things our politicians say. Anyway, but yeah, no, yeah, transparency would be a step in the right direction. Like, I wouldn't think that we should stop there, like, just because, oh, we got transparency. And of course, that wouldn't be enough. However, would it be a step in the right direction, and would it give us a better idea of where to go? Yes, it would. I would absolutely support increased transparency. And again, that may be the first step, and that may be the most that we'd be able to get at the moment. But again, this is new territory, and again, I talk about public utilities. The analogy only goes so far, right? Like the analogy of a power company or a water company or even a telephone company. Like it only goes so far before the comparison breaks down, because we're dealing with the internet. We're dealing with a space that, as somebody in the discussion we were having the other day pointed out, is at least hypothetically unlimited. And while I counter that, human beings don't work that way, human psychology doesn't work that way. The amount of time we have and the amount of attention we have is still limited. Um, Nevertheless, there are a lot of different questions to consider when talking about social media platforms, um, and it is new territory. Like, this is not tested. This is not precedented. We don't have a precedent for this. We have some precedents that we can draw from, but those precedents will only take us so far. Like, we have a bunch of different questions that we have to answer before we're able to have a reasonable settlement on what place these social media platforms occupy in our society, and to what extent they have some kind of responsibility or to society, or rather, um, to what extent they ought to be regulated and restricted in what they can and cannot do.
Oh, absolutely. But with regard to this point, we can easily look at YouTube channels who have more views and who reach bigger audiences than established TV shows. And it's
Yeah,
like Queen said a long time ago, a couple of decades ago, uh, TV killed the radio stars or something like that. Is the same thing. YouTube and online killed the TV shows, and we need to
yeah,
move. Definitely, we need to move and measure according to the new metrics. Not to say, well, but we still have shows on TV, yeah, and who the beep is still watching them and in a
yeah.
meaningful way.
Yeah. Nobody's getting TV in that manner anymore. Like, the TV is on the internet now. That's how people get most of their TV, except for old timers who are still watching Fox on their
Yeah.
on their satellite dish. Like, oh my gosh! But no, but yeah, no, it's exactly that. Uh, there was a time when we didn't have telephone companies and when we didn't have television stations, and when they were developed, yeah, you know what, they had a lot of leeway in how they could conduct their business and how they could manage their services. And then at some point it became where it's like, nah, you guys are too big and your services are too fundamental to society to let you just do whatever you want. You now have to abide by certain rules. And in many of these cases, it's been extended to, you have to abide by the Constitution as well, as if you were a government. And
Okay.
and again, and so again, uh, we're getting to the place where I think social media companies are hitting that territory, that kind of territory, at least.
Okay. I hear you saying that, and it comes to my mind that under the various communist regimes here in the Soviet Union and Eastern Bloc, uh, every there were only, of course, state televisions and state-owned press. And in each state television and in each press, the secret police, secret services, various branches of the secret services, and of course the party secret police had special agents, and they were literally communicated, like they were sort of imitated, they were drawing some form of inspiration from the wartime era when it was necessary for the government to dictate to the newspaper, write about that, don't write about the opposing topic because we are communists and we don't encourage, I don't know, capitalist discourse or fascist discourse. But that was a form of reasoning. But after that, it was right, you are allowed to write only what we, the government and the party apparatsky, are allowing you to say. And therefore there were people literally doing this kind of stuff. And I'm seeing in the United States, and of course, that tradition literally spilled in after
Mhm.
remained in practice after the fall of the communists. And
Of
I'm
course.
seeing the same stuff happening with the CIA slash FBI, other free letter agency
Yeah.
from the government dictating that to CNN and every other thing, to the big media, hey, there are weapons of mass destruction in Iraq or whatever other narrative. Start pumping that narrative with complete disregard to any proper research and counter arguments. Okay, and I'm seeing lots of people discussing this thing with the freedom of speech, and there this connection, not necessarily evil because it's evil only in its manifestation, it's being completely overlooked. Like, how would you go in this new system of control and also keep in mind, make a note that the state, yes, needs to have a hand in these media outlets, but it also needs to be, I don't know, chopped up from time to
Sure.
time, heavily slapped. How would you go about that?
Well, um, well, I mean, with regards to that, I mean, declaring them state actors in the United States, that doesn't make them government agencies. They're not under the direct control of the United States government that way. They would still be private businesses. Um, to the extent that our own alphabet soup of agencies decides to pull psyops on us, like, well, they've already done that since they existed. Um, I don't anticipate that would change under the circumstances, and that's a I would argue that uh, that's a whole other monster that needs to be fought. But because I mean, I'm no big fan of the FBI or the CIA or the DHS or the NSA or any of the other it feels like millions of agencies sometimes, but um but I mean, certainly I would like to see more transparency in those organizations, but regardless of our own government's propensity to lie to us and to use our media institutions to push propaganda, um, at the very least, our government has to do a song and dance where they have to respect our rights. And currently, we're in a place where enough of our speech is controlled by private entities, or at least operates on their platforms, to where uh, they have effective control over it. Um, they have effective
Yeah,
control over our speech. I mean, that's
and
just a fact. And we declared telephone companies state actors, and they didn't control the content of our speech. They weren't censoring us, they were just providing us the ability to communicate. Not only do these companies provide us the ability to communicate, and we have become dependent on it for our society, but they're also exercising censorious capacities. And again, they exert a level of control over what we can say and not say. And that's a level of control that didn't exist before. That's a level of control that publicly or privately did not exist in our society. And so it's not even just that, oh, well, we've got these social media companies and the internet's different, and you know, the times are strange. It's like, no, the level of control being exercised over what we can say and can't say is that's also changed because we've, you know, again, never had this level of control over what we can and can't say, not from our government and not from private institutions. And it's so
Yeah,
direct. And it's so direct too because it's different than the NBC, ABC, and you know, basically the five channels that existed in the 1950s. It's different from those networks deciding what gets aired and what doesn't get aired on their networks. This extends to what we ourselves are saying, what we ourselves type, what we ourselves express, and so it's more than just um, directing the public conversation, and you know, and deciding what gets broadcast in society as a whole, but it's very direct and very personal in that it comes after it comes directly into what you just said.
yeah, and I would add to flesh it out even further. They are literally controlling the reward mechanisms, the
Yeah,
reward punishment, the dopamine, serotonin, because ultimately Facebook and other media, social media giants, and not only social media, various corporations had bunch of research investigating how they can make their messages or whatever they want to promote as the daily message, the hourly message, as being more addictive than anything else
yeah,
present on their platform. And I believe that's like an extremely evil thing in the way it is used, not necessarily in its
sure,
abstract, because
well,
yeah,
sure,
but in how they are using and benefited from it. Like, come on, you are literally telling me that this is the not only the logical stuff, but this is right and that is wrong in absence of fact. You want me to believe, and this is like going backwards in time hundreds of years ago or under the communists. Believe in
yeah,
the communist doctrine. Like, okay, do you have proof? No, just believe in us or we'll shoot you in the back of the head or something.
yeah. Well, because you know, the same thing was said of television when it first came into being, right? That, you know, it was rotting our brains and it was hacking into our brains, which, hey, to be fair, that was all true. Like it was all true. But that's doesn't mean that I'm anti-TV. Like that doesn't mean I wanted the television to go away. And I'm not anti social media. I'm not anti these corporations existing um necessarily. Like it's just I mean granted, I wish corporations in general didn't exist, but that's an argument for another day. But you know, I'm not anti Facebook. I It's a good overall, it's a good thing for social media to exist. It's a good thing that television existed. The problem, it only lies in its misapplication, and in the power that it exercises. You know, it's not that I want social media platforms to go away. It's that I wish for a more beneficial presence in our society. You know, a lot of people want to blame like every all our social ills on social media, and like, while some of that's, you know, some of it's warranted in that, and again, how the algorithms are and how the dopamine affects our brains and things like that. But the very fact that social media exists isn't in and of itself bad, and it isn't in and of itself the source of our problems. It just has more to do with the amount of control that it exerts, and the amount of, you know, benefit undue benefit a few people derive from causing that kind of dysfunction and exerting that kind of control over people.
Well, you see, I would. adopt a bit more harsher stance on that, as I would say that since the very beginning, I caught the early years of the internet and everything was free, open source and stuff, and people were collaborating and great interesting stuff was there. But after a while, the intent of the corporations taking part, getting involved in these online slash internet activities, literally brought and implemented this intent of manipulating for the benefit. And I would say that this is a flaw that wasn't present there from day zero, from the first initial moment when from the inception, but in day one or at least two it definitely got there how we can benefit, and this sort of not necessarily an intent but definitely a wish to manipulate what is there. It's huge, it's bigger than you described and stuff. That would be my position, so we need to be more to pay more attention to this aspect.
Oh, right. I just, I suppose yeah. I mean, I won't argue that seems fairly reasonable to me. Just I don't think that Mark Zuckerberg necessarily started out wanting to take over the world. Like, he wound up in that position. I just don't think he began with that intention.
Oh yeah, evil Mark grasping his hands like, "Wahaha, I'll make money off you people."
And as much as I dislike Bill Gates, like, I don't think he started out malevolently either.
Oh,
Well,
I absolutely agree. But that's what I'm saying. Ultimately, they ended up functioning in such a way that there is a good chunk of ill intent associated with that, or too much manipulation.
it's it's just the function of being successful in the system that we have, you know, like, you kind of become a little bit of a victim of your own success, because in order to keep being successful, you have to keep innovating, you have to keep finding ways to stay on top, to beat your competition. And so you people who are successful can't help, and again, this is getting into a sort of a tangent conversation, but uh, it's almost a function of how the system works, and this unregulated environment that we're in. So again, i I think that part of that would be resolved if we the regulation was better crafted in order to manage the role these media companies play in our society.
Okay, here is the next question. Um, who would be apart from this next entity we will create to regulate this social media? I mean, there will definitely be people from the government, maybe some congressman or something. There will be representative from each corporation and somebody from the public. Who would you choose from the public and why? And also, uh, how would you tell them, hey, go tell these corporations to not be evil anymore or to play nice and have each like 40% of the market and we reserve 1% for the government? How would you go with that?
Okay. Well, if I can pick anybody and there's no repercussions for this, let's put Edward Snowden and let's put Edward Snowden and Julian Assange on the case. Let's have them be
Okay,
the representatives of the public.
okay, yeah, 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 yeah. Okay, not only them, we need more from the public, but yeah,
Oh, of course,
those are
of course.
great names. Yeah.
You know, I imagine that there are various nonprofits that exist where people have been working on these sorts of things. I know that there was a documentary where they were talking about, I think it was Facebook specifically, but they had a number of people who were talking about the way that it functions and the way that it operates, and have the criticism that they have of it. And it's like, these all sound like reasonable people. I would actually want them in the room helping to craft such legislation, because they have a firm grasp on the issue, and they have an intimate knowledge of how things operate on the backside of these companies, and they would be able to better convey the public's interests because they already have the studies or the knowledge base to be able to say like this is what the effect is in people's brains, this is how it affects our social interactions, this is how it's affecting our elections, this is how it's affecting just social discourse in general. Like I think that such people, and again, I don't remember the name of the documentary on Netflix. I just remember that it was there and I saw parts of it. But those would be the kind of people I would want representing the public, because I mean, let's be honest, the average person doesn't always necessarily have the knowledge base of how all these things work. Like even I, giving this argument right here, right now, like I don't know how these algorithms work. I don't know the science and the technical aspects of these systems. Um, I only have a layperson's understanding of this. And so, I would absolutely want people who know better than me in that room. Because
Oh,
again,
and
all I'm proposing is something that is very conceptual, and it is also a very rough draft idea. Like it's barely even a rough draft idea, I'll admit.
absolutely, but see what, for example, I find as an underlying issue with this, let's say, idea of a new organization is that I would like to put you in the board, okay, not as the expert, but simply as a person from the public to be there, give you like 3 months, sort of 1 hour a day training, and after 3 months, I would put you for 6 or 12 months on that to be the representative of the public, and most of the time they should speak in such manner that you should understand, because
Right.
if we if we disconnect the average public from the experts, I believe we are moving towards all sorts of not utopian but dystopian type of
Yes, I
technocracies
see what
and
you're saying.
bullshit. So yeah, I like totally agree with experts, with Edward Snowden's people with a complete history of fighting for human rights, transparency, and all the other stuff. But I would like to see a person, you or anybody else like you know, get a bit of preparation, up to speed with the terminologies and stuff, and both get on and there and say your stuff, talk your mind,
You
and say,
know,
hey, that I agree and I don't disagree.
yeah, I actually had a thought while you were because I see what you're saying now. I think it would be possibly a good idea to set up some sort of lottery that citizens could sign up for, and just basically have it, have members of the public chosen by lottery, uh, and
I believe any method is acceptable as long as we can put people from the general public in
right.
those positions, because they need to be, they are the users. Otherwise, let's put experts, and oh, you are not expert enough to criticize what the experts, like, come on. No, don't like that kind. I have seen enough experts here in the commie
Oh
circles
yeah,
and stuff
yeah,
in order to
certainly. I
be
mean, I have my
allergic.
own. Yeah, no, I have my own criticism of the technocracy as well. So, no, that's a good point, and I actually hadn't thought of that. But I think, yeah, I think that there would be ways, and not even just on this issue, but just in general, where it would probably be good to set up some sort of system to include just regular people as intimate and integral parts of the process, not just like, oh, we're going to hold public meetings where anybody can come and voice their concerns, which I agree those sorts of things should happen as well, but also like, no, let's grab some random people out of the public who are at least interested, and let's let's put them in the position to become intimately acquainted with what's going on, so that they, so we have the input of a regular person as opposed to all of these people who walk around in the halls of government and in corporate boardrooms, and uh, you know, uh, yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah, I would like to throw these ideas. I would look up that Netflix documentary. If you can send me as a message later, maybe you can find it. And I would send an email to those people and ask them, hey, how would you go about that? And let's try and make a mock-up meeting. How would that type of
Okay,
meeting would go?
there,
Why not?
I think, yeah. So there were two things. I think one of them was a bit of a dramatization, the social dilemma, and then I also think the great hack. I think both of those were ones, but the social dilemma I think is the one I was referring to. I think it was the social dilemma,
Uh,
which was a hybrid. There was a fictional story, but then there was also actual documentary and interviews involved with it as well.
Okay, so they were putting up a form of hypothetical, not to point fingers at real world present day problems.
Right, right. So in other words, we're not calling out anybody specifically. We're just calling out the industry in general.
Yes, yes. On a different planet, alternate universe. No, we are not talking about you. Please do not shut us down.
Please, please don't turn us into robots.
Yes, yes. Okay, so we've been through the costs, the private entities cosplaying as public but denying the responsibility. Um, yeah, maybe we should go a bit more, but that needs some proper research in the aspects of how the content we consume shapes our decisions and consumes our dopamine and stuff. As I've been reading that you get it increases your anxiety and some nasty
Oh yeah.
responses from you when you don't get the reward and people, I don't know, not necessarily hate, but don't agree with you and stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean it's good to have the data and everything, but like I don't know that you needed a study to figure that out, man. I get anxious when I use social media. Like it definitely like doom scrolling and getting anxious and like that I've had experience with that, and most people I know like they have the same similar stories to share, and it's like doesn't take a study to figure that out, but nonetheless it is good to have the data on it and have it actually studied. But no, it's absolutely a thing where it can affect your mental health. That's why I will take about a month's long break from social media, especially Facebook, just because debate wise, that's the one I happen to use the most because I can type a lot in Facebook. But I take about a month off and I just deactivate my account, and I actually do a lot better during that month. Like it takes me a few days to stop my habit of going there, but once I get over that, it's like I actually feel a lot better. I actually feel a lot better about my life and what I'm doing.
Yeah,
So,
I hear you and I totally agree with you. Fortunately, I developed some discipline with regard to social media, and this is something, a type of message that maybe should be disseminated, spread way more often and further. Uh, Develop, make your own routine and keep to that,
uh-huh.
make it a discipline kind of stuff to get in, interact, and when you reach certain levels of this or that enthusiasm or
Right.
depression, get out before that, and don't let it
Uh-huh.
be the end all and stuff, and that would maybe help plenty of people.
Oh yeah, yeah. And I do better than I used to, and I think we in general, I think people in general are getting better. Like it may seem like problems are getting worse with social media, and like it's just a catastrophe, but we are adjusting. We are learning to live with it, and we are learning to better handle its place in our lives. Like,
And
it's new. It's like in the scheme of history, like it's still new. Remember, it's still new. We're still adjusting. And even like the kids that are growing up now, like their interaction with the internet and with social media apps is different than what mine was growing up. And so, we're adjusting, and eventually, people are becoming parents who have grown up with the internet and social media, and it's like their perspective on these things is going to be different than their parents' words. And so they're going to incorporate those thoughts and their experiences having grown up with it into their parenting. And so, like, we will adjust. We will get through this. Like, this isn't going to be something that's just going to destroy the human race and just make us depressed forever. Like, no, we're getting better. We're adjusting and we're learning still. So, at least that's how I see it.
no, again, I agree with you. I also see plenty of signs that these better things, better behavior are happening. My concern would be if we properly understand the problems and how to deal with problems. Because, for example, I've been interacting with people who have been for therapeutical sessions. They talked with various therapists for various issues, and they had a good understanding of what they were going through, how to deal, how to manage that situation, and so on. And they were pretty present and in good control, at least at the discourse level. They had a very good maturity and understanding of what was happening and how to deal with that. I don't think. I think that what you're saying, yes, it does exist, but I don't think that the insides are the same. I don't think there is this proper understanding. Hey, get off the internet because it's toxic, or how you should deal with that. The manifestation, the effect is I'm getting off because it's toxic. Yes, it exists. I don't think the justification and the understanding of what it causes is just as well fleshed out. That's my
Oh yeah, and again, like, that's part of our learning, is that we're still learning how this is hacked into our brains and why we're so mesmerized and drawn into it, and we're still learning those things. We know
okay.
some of those
Who
things, and we have more data than we did 5 years ago, than we did 10 years ago, and we will continue to learn more about how these things affect our brains and how they affect our social interactions. Um, we
question?
will. So yeah.
Who would you put the onus on, or to not necessarily mediate, but to make these issues clearer? On the government, on the companies, on third bodies, third entities, on us, the plain individuals?
Well, I mean, I would certainly say that I would say that it's incumbent upon governments and education institutions to research these things and to fund researching on these things. Um, as far as like regulating people's use of the internet, or regulating their use of computers and regulating their use of social media, that's ultimately going to be up to individual people. That's ultimately going to be up to people to decide for themselves. I don't think the onus should be on the social media companies, and I don't think that it should be on even the government either. Like, I know that China, for example, just restricted kids to like 2 hours of video games a week, and it's like, no, I would not support that. That is an individual decision to be made, not the uh, it wouldn't be the federal government's business, and it wouldn't be the state government's business either, in this country. And so, however, I do think that as far as what companies could do, because, and again, I don't run them, and I don't know their business model or how they necessarily make all of their money. I mean, like, I know some of the basics, but like, I'm not in the boardroom looking at their sheets. But I would say that maybe putting in more features or options that give people a better sense of control over their own usage is better.
A
And
sort
you do.
a sort of timer. Hey, you have been on scrolling on Facebook for 45 minutes. Get the beep out and shut it
Yeah,
down.
yeah. Go touch grass, as the saying goes. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
no,
yeah.
yeah, no. I think that actually would be beneficial. To kind of like be like, hey, you've been on for 30 minutes. Do you want to step away for a minute? Because the other thing is, it's like I don't think that would hurt their business model. I don't think that would hurt their platform to do that. I actually think people would become their view of the company would be more favorable, and their view of the platform would become more favorable, and their use and they would associate their use with it more positive feelings rather than with more negative feelings. And I think that in the long run, I think that that will actually help their profitability and the sustainability of their business model, rather than this trying to eke out every drop of serotonin out of people they possibly can, and then depressing us in the process, in the long run. Um,
Yeah, but it's okay. The pharma corporations always will have a better
oh
drug to.
yes. Oh yes,
So
of course they will. No, and yeah, and that's all. Oh my gosh, we could go on all night, but like no, like Facebook, I noticed, for example, they have this thing now where if you've already scrolled through and seen everything new in your feed, they actually have a little notice that says you're all caught up now.
oh,
I actually
okay.
appreciate that because it stops me from doom scrolling and looking at the same things I've just scrolled past the last 20 times. Like, and so I do appreciate things like that. And it's not about babysitting me. It's not about nannying me. It's about giving me a greater sense of autonomy. It's about giving me autonomy
Yeah,
again.
we could get into a sort of conversation how much of that sense of autonomy and the independence or freedom to choose is real and how much is false. But let's
Well, yeah, I
let's.
mean, good lord, I mean, I don't deny we live in a sort of a matrix reality. I just don't know how you exit that kind of a reality. But no, like, but to the extent that I can look at this and at the very least feel, if it's not actually real, at the very least I feel like it, that I have a better sense of what I'm doing with this, and I have a better sense of my autonomy, and where it doesn't feel like it's controlling me or just like hypnotizing me. I think that that's good.
And see, for example, I would have no problem to for someone to not necessarily scan my brain, but it sounds very ominous or something, but literally
Yeah,
to have more detailed data about
sure.
our behavior on the apps for us to better understand what is happening there. And of course, I would like to see more transparency on the type of addiction this social media
Yeah.
companies are researching and are doing research to get them more addictive in order to have better control, but everybody is hiding it and you cannot talk about how let's analyze public data. No, it's not, because it's my data. Yes, but we live in society and we need to move beyond then this sort of
Mhm.
weird disconnection between me as individual and what is happening around me in the internet, on in the online space.
Yeah. I would like to see more research on that, and I think yeah, even if it was just me personally, like, sure, if somebody offered that for free, or even to pay me, but hey, but if somebody offered that for free and I didn't have to pay for it, and my insurance didn't have to cover it either, to scan my brain to see how my brain's working on social media, I would love to know that information actually. So yeah, I do think it's it'll be important to see more research and studies done on our interaction with social media. And no doubt they will continue to have those studies. No doubt that research will continue into the future. And so um sure. And so again, I reiterate, like, yeah, there are serious concerns that we should have, and questions and conversations that we need to have about social media and the place it occupies in our society, especially specific platforms, because they have the most draw in society. But I don't say that because I hate them. I don't say that because I want them to go away. It's because I would rather better understand where it is that we are with these things and be able to make better decisions on where to go with these things in the future.
No, and you are totally correct. The idea that we are having this conversation because we hate the social media while we are on social media, it's a bit like wait, what? And also the cat is out of the bag.
Yeah,
We are not going to shut down Facebook and put what in
no.
its place, because something else will manifest and it could be 10 times worse. But that not that that is an argument against doing stuff, but we cannot simply shut these companies down and say, well, we did a great thing in 2022, we should have shut down Facebook and Google. Like, what? No. But we should definitely regulate them and have this conversation properly. Oh, by the way, uh, where should we go next with this conversation? uh, Also next, and to whom, to reach to what people, maybe YouTubers, Twitch streamers or stuff, uh, Discord servers. Where shall we take this conversation for more transparency?
Um Honestly, anywhere would be good. Like anywhere that we can start these sorts of conversations, I think would be good. Because they do need to be had, and the more it becomes part of the public discourse, the more this kind of conversation becomes mainstream. Uh, And again, a lot of these conversations are already mainstream. Like these are already happening. But I would think that I would argue that the proposal of making these state actors, at least in the United States, anyway, I think that that's a conversation that we should have. And so anywhere that that conversation can be promoted, I think that that would be a good place to go.
Okay, I was asking about common individuals like you, me, and other people with YouTube
Oh,
channels and internet discords. Otherwise, if there is a specific NGO, uh, that organization already has a certain amount of infrastructure, finance, and stuff, and experience, no highway, and it's a bit out of our conversational like sphere like we are having right now. And uh, I believe it's very important for us to send a message that we as individuals, regardless if we are in the same country or across the
mhm.
globe on different parts, we can advocate, we can be advocates, and we can
Yeah,
ask, and this is what we should do, and we encourage and foster this type of constructive conversations.
yeah. I agree. Uh, I don't know if I'm the best one to ask about how to organize all that, but I certainly would be an avid supporter of having those conversations. So
I treat everyone, and I'm asking everyone, sort of regardless of their stated experience, because I would like to believe that I'm living on a planet with smart people, not working like, oh, I am the smartest person and you peasant, you don't know what I'm talking about, so I cannot ask you. No, you are at least as smart as me, if not maybe smarter, or have a different perspective, and you can have a type of input which can be very valuable. So that's why I'm asking.
oh yeah, no. I don't know what you're talking about. I am right and everyone else be damned. Damn it. No, um, no. But yeah, no, I get it, and yeah, that's what social media does for us. Like that's what the internet has done, is it's given regular people the ability to interact and to have these conversations in a way that we weren't able to before, and we're able to have them across the world. And so that's not an ability I want to lose. And so I guess to close, to bring it back to the free speech part that we started with, um, I want to preserve that ability going into the future and not have it be lost, just because we don't have the wherewithal to put in the regulations that we need to have in order to actually preserve the freedom that we want to have on the internet. Um, you know, freedom is not absolute. Freedom is conditional, and it's conditioned upon our maintenance and upon crafting the kind of policies and rules that actually allow us to be free, and not just to be in a, you know, not to just lose that freedom just at the drop of a hat because someone ruined it for everyone else, or because a few powerful people decided that this doesn't suit our interests anymore.
Well, nicely said. Shall we wrap it up here?
Yeah, I think this is a good place. 1 hour and 30 minutes is a good number, and I am about to turn into a pumpkin if I'm honest. So
Oh, okay. Oh, Trevor, thank you very much for coming on and for this conversation. Like, I really appreciate your input because you said lots of interesting, smart stuff, and I hope our viewers
I do try
will
sometimes.
also. Oh, okay, and you succeed, yes. And I do think that our viewers will find it interested. I'll love to share it with the folks that we were previously discussing it in the Discord and see their input, or and maybe get on the debate channels, debate type of servers. That anyway, there is a type of specific channel where you can have a conversation with audience and get more input in on that. But yeah, let's see where it goes.
Sounds good. Thank you, Memories.
Okay, so I've been Moff with Memories of the Future. Thank you everybody for listening. I'll update the title and the description. I'll put this my Discord server link in the description, and yeah, join the conversation and let's bring something smarter and not just stay there because freedoms exist and we don't have to do nothing. Yes. Okay. See ya, everybody.
Have a good evening or good day. Bye.